So as I told you before, I've been intrigued by the studies you've made live on stage studying brainwaves using transcendental meditation. It's just so fascinating, and I want to jump straight into it. I want to ask you, how long have you been studying the impact of TM on the brain?
For about 30 years. And I look at range of people from 10-year-olds up to 80-year-olds, people who are practicing transcendental meditation. I've also looked at world-class performers and to see how is their brain functioning. And I look at the brain not because I think the brain produces consciousness or creates consciousness, but rather the brain is our interface. It's how we are connected with the outside world and how we interact with the outside world. So by measuring the interface, you get a sense of what's going on inside.
First of all, that's longer than I've been alive. So you really know your stuff. And I want to ask you, there's a lot of high performers that are stressed and that think that stress is really good for them to be productive. So what do you wish high performers understood about what happens to the brain under stress and burnout?
Yeah, there's two issues being confounded here. One is challenge, the other is stress. When people say, I need stress to function at my best, what they really mean is high challenge. Because what happens under challenge is the brainstem activates the whole brain, and under challenge, you see things more clearly, you hear them more distinctly. Under challenge, the brain's actually moving information through the system more quickly. That experience of the challenge state is a flow experience. You're completely completely involved with what's going on, but at the same time, you're standing back, you're whole, you're flowing, one point's leading to the other. And then what happens is once the challenge gets too much, and this can simply happen because you're tired, because there's been some little aggravation that's happened. You have to take your car to the shop, your child is sick. And what that does is it makes the perception of the challenge, it's too much, I can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as that happens, that's when you see the stress response. And with the stress response, what happens is the brainstem activates the amygdala, and with that, frontal lobes go offline. With that, there's a huge activation of the bodily systems, and your muscles get tight, and your vision gets very focused and funneled. And this is what great athletes, this is what world performers will tell you. To function at the best, they have to be rested. Their mind has to be clear. They have to be well fed. They need to be strong. And then they have to get out of the way and just allow themselves to innocently respond. And as soon as, and you see this with tennis players, and suddenly one of their forehands go long. And then this goes from the challenge to the stress response. Rather than just being there and allowing you to deal with things in an automatic, easy manner, you start to analyze. Frontal lobes come in, and then for the tennis game, everything just breaks down and they lose 6-love and so on. So it's this point between challenge and stress, which I think is key.
So then the question becomes, how do you make sure you don't break through to the stress place and you stay within that challenging place so that you can experience those flow states?
Excellent question. And that is the next step. And one way is just to keep the body functioning at its best. Sleep. You need to get 8, some need 7, some need 9. You need to get enough sleep so you're rested. When you're rested, what you're actually doing is you're removing sleep dirt from the brain. The brain's functioning at its best. You need to have good food because it's the food which is fueling the body. You need to have good relationships so the whole heart is at ease. And this is where the value of meditation comes in. Because what sleep does, sleep reduces frontal functioning. What stress does, it reduces frontal functioning. The frontal functioning is what's giving you the big picture. Meditations like Transcendental Meditation, what we see is increased blood flow to the front part of the brain. What you're doing is you're building those circuits that allow that experience of wholeness, of quietness, of silence to be there. Because that's not a passing mental state. It's actually a physiological state. The interface is functioning in a specific way. So as you If you're playing tennis and you have to work on your tennis stroke, that's important to build up those circuits. But then you need to stop, transcend, build up those circuits which are just whole and full and awake, silent. And those are actually physical muscles, so to speak, that you're also building. So that when you're in a challenging situation, you don't perceive it as stress. This is what we found with research with students, with athletes, with managers, with nurses. Once they practice transcendental meditation, turn their attention within to deep inner silence, perceived stress goes down. It's an actual scale. It's called the perceived stress scale. You actually begin to perceive the world in a different way. So this is where meditation comes to be an important asset for the busy individual.
That's so fascinating. Number one, I saw a video of yours where you studied through a scientific experiment the impact of TM on the performance of world-class performers. So I want to ask you, what did you discover through it, and how could it be useful to someone who's trying to excel in their career?
Excellent. Yeah, what we did is we identified what are the patterns of people who are becoming more in touch with their inner silence. That's part of you, where your creativity comes from. That's where your energy comes from. That's the core of who you are. And we said we should find this pattern in successful people because they're able to function under high pressure, able to make key decisions which turn out to be correct. So we looked at athletes, 66 athletes. Half of them, well, first they were all played in World Games, National Games, Olympics. Half of them were in the top 10 for 3 of their seasons. The other half never consistently placed. And what we found is those who consistently placed had this brain measure, the term we use is called brain integration, that we see in people who are in contact with their inner self during meditation. Brain integration means you're integrating the experience of the brain attention being turned within with the ability of the brain being turned without into focus and control. So what you're seeing in the brain is the ability of the athlete to focus on, or the manager, to focus on what's happening right now, but not losing the big picture.
That was so interesting when I saw the difference between performers that were okay performers and world-class performers that actually did TM, and I saw the graph, and I was so fascinated by the fact that it could have such a huge impact. There's a quote of yours that I really like, and I want to ask you what inspired you to formulate it. You say your brain is a river, not a rock.
Yes, that's one of my favorite too. Thank you for bringing it up. It's bringing out the point that the brain's not a crystalline-like structure. It's not like a computer which has all of the circuits there. It's not a rock. Rather, the brain is a river. It has 100 billion processors, and the way the brain is built is the connection between those change with every minute-by-minute experience. So literally the brain is a river in terms of how you're connecting the 100 billion neurons in your brain is constantly changing, and it's changing directed by your attention. People will be listening to this podcast. They'll be attending to our thoughts and our stream of ideas. When they turn off the podcast, their brain is going to be connected a little bit differently. They go and talk with a friend. The circuits that are created by this time together is going to be affecting how they perceive the world, because again, the brain is the interface, and everything we're doing is refining that interface based on where our attention is going.
Wow. So moment to moment, experience to experience, we're changing and evolving and growing as human beings.
Yeah.
It's such a fascinating thing because we think we're the static piece of matter.
That point is, we're not a static human being. And this is so critical for the listeners to know, that you are in control, because you make a decision. Based on that decision, you have an experience. Based on that experience, you use specific brain circuits, and those are the brain circuits that you're going to use tomorrow. So you are in control. Something happens in the past. Are you a victim of it? Are you completely constricted by that? No, you make decisions of what I'm going to do now, and you work out of that. You see, you don't think you're good at math. Start doing math. You don't think you're good at art, start doing art. It's just a matter of our choices are creating the brain circuits that we have.
There's something really interesting. I had a friend of my brother come and he told me I'm feeling so powerless because I have this thought. I read this study that your height affects your intelligence, and that the smaller you are, the lower your IQ, and the higher you are, the higher your IQ. And we had a conversation about perception and how your limiting beliefs can either define your reality or make you powerless. So, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. Because every experience are two things coming together. That is what's actually out there and our perception of who we are, where we're going, what we can do. So if we think, oh no, I'm going to make a mistake, you'll make that mistake. And even more, for experience changes the brain. They find if an athlete, say a gymnast, goes through their routine in their brain, the connections in the brain to do that routine actually become stronger. And if, as they visualize themselves falling off the high bar, for instance, when they go through the routine, they'll fall off the high bar. We are so much in control of how we program the physiology, which is how we express ourselves in the world.
That's so, first of all, recomforting to know. And that brings up my next question, which is what specific changes have to happen through TM to the brain coherence to experience deep. So, yeah, let me rephrase that. What specific changes have to happen through TM to the brain coherence to experience deep inner peace?
It's not as though the brain changes have to come first and then the experience happens. It's the other way around. And this is the value of transcendental meditation. It's not a process of expectation, evaluation, reevaluating, deciding something new to do. It's not it's not declarative. There's not steps of doing. Transcendental meditation is more like procedural knowledge. It's like riding a bike. And what you do is you go to a trained teacher, they discuss just the whole process, and then they teach you to meditate. And the way they teach you to meditate is they have you close your eyes. They give you a specific sound. It's a sound without a meaning. It's a mantra, but it's not a word which has both content or meaning and sound, but it's just a sound itself. And the value of the sound is allow the mind to settle down. There's allow the attention to turn within. Rather than going outward through senses and thinking and acting and doing and control, to go within. And then you literally do nothing as an individual, but the only thing you do is you allow the process of transcending to happen, because our mind does not like restriction. It does not like boundaries. It's always wanting to know more. It's always wanting to be fuller. And the quieter levels of the mind are more rich in creativity and intelligence. So in your very first time when you see a teacher, you actually experience the mind settling down. Now, to do that, the body has to function in a specific way. So it's the mind going inwards that's dragging, so to say, the physiology to this style of functioning where the whole body and mind are just awake and alert. Not thinking, not doing, but just awake and alert. And these are the circuits that you're strengthening. So by using the mind through the meditation procedure, transcendental meditation, transcending, then going back into activity, that's where you begin to rewire the brain. And that's how the brain patterns that we see in meditation begin to come out into daily activity.
And so then you feel the peace you feel in your meditation more and more in your daily life?
Yeah.
There's a point that came to mind that's really interesting. When I meditate, I still recall this moment. I was meditating, then I finished my meditation, and my dad's just standing there, and and he was like, "What are you doing? Transcendental meditation?" I was like, "Yeah," and then he said, you just sit there and do nothing?" I said, "Yeah," and he's like, "What a waste of time." So
yes.
So how would you answer that? What are the benefits of meditation?
Yeah, the way I would answer that is different rules give you success in different arenas. in the outside world, you just can't sit there and do nothing and expect to get anything. You have to focus, you have to control, you have to use energy and so on. Those are the rules of how to be successful in business. But to be able to take the mind, which is localized, which is moving, and allow it to settle down to inner silence, the rules are different. It's like a wave settling down into an ocean. The rules are different. If there's anything that you do, it means that wave is always going to remain a wave because you're doing something. So how can that wave completely settle down? And this is what Maharishi has envisioned and what he's created with the Transcendental Meditation technique, is a way to allow us to nature to take us into the transcendent. And so the rules are different. So that's one thing I would say. And then the second thing I would tell him is, Dad, when you've had a hard problem, how did you come up with the solution? He said, well, I worked really hard at it. I said, yes, but when did the solution come? And he'll say, well, it's when I stopped working on the problem and I walked outside. I just sat for a moment and looked out. And everyone has this experience. Our creative thoughts don't come from the level of thinking and acting. They come from the level of deep silence. And what we're doing with TM is we're exploring that level of deep silence so we can be more connected with it during the day. So when there is a problem, yes, you have to look at all the issues of the problem space, but then to get the solution, you have to let go. And now you're more familiar, so you can just wait a moment. The mind will settle down. The creative thought will come, and then you can bring it out.
Beautiful. I hope that would convince him to start. The thing with high performers is that they seek the most time efficient thing. They want the highest ROI on their time, especially meditation. So you talk about 3 forms of meditation: focused attention, open monitoring, and automatic self-transcendence. Can you guide us through their impact on your states of consciousness and which one is the best, the most effective?
Excellent question. First, I applaud you for doing your homework.
Thank you.
And so the point about the 3 meditations is they're different procedures, and it's not as though one is better than the other, but rather each one is geared for a specific purpose.
Okay.
Focus attention is geared to be able to control the mind. And that's how some people see, well, if I have to do my taxes or I have to study for class, I have to be able to control the mind and block out irrelevant stimuli. So the focus attention work on the ability of trying to keep the mind from moving. The brainwave you see when you do this is a brainwave you see whenever you're focusing the mind. The name is called gamma. It's a frequency of brainwaves that go from 20 to 50 cycles per second. It's made by interneurons that are connecting individual parts of the brain. So what you're doing is you're using a very isolated part of the brain and you're really keeping the attention there. Second level of meditation, open monitoring. What this is doing is it's allowing all experiences to go through the mind, but it's keeping attention to what's happening right now. So with focused attention, you're concerned with the object in the mind. Open monitoring, you're concerned with this relationship between me and the object. So an experience comes up, you note, okay, what is, and you rate it. Okay, is this a 10? Is it really intense? Is it a 6? Is it a 5? And then you let it go. You can do the same thing with body scanning. Just notice what's happening in body. Oh, my shoulders are tight. Well, you just go on and so on. It can just be looking, just breath going in and out. And then as the thoughts come, when you're aware that you're caught up in the thought, and then you say, okay, what's happening right now? And this mindfulness meditation is in this category. Zazen is in this category. And what this meditation allows you to do is build those circuits to cope with really intense experiences. Rather than being lost in that intense experience, you can just begin to be mindful of it. Mindful meaning in a non-judgmental way. Okay, this is happening, let it go. I really have anger and this bursting through my body. I know I can't respond, and so you disengage and you go. So, and that has its own brainwave as well. It's called theta. is the label. It goes up between 5 and 8 cycles per second. And you see that whenever you're following internal mental processing. When your listeners, or maybe they're driving, listening to the podcast, and as they stop and think, okay, what is the route I'm going to take to get home? You'll see theta in there, EEG, because they're actually following some mental map inside. The third category, automatic self-transcending, starts with thinking, but it ends up with being. This idea of the wave in the ocean. It starts with a wave, and then that wave settles down, and you experience the ocean which is always there. And the ocean, the water, is the essential content of the wave. And as you experience the ocean, you experience the essential content of who you are. And you begin to perceive that you're not the wave, and the waves are coming and going. What you fundamentally are the ocean. And this is the process of transcending. And the value of this, which Transcendental Meditation is in this category, the value of this is you connect your individual thinking and acting with that more fundamental field of life, which is underlying and guiding all of life. And so your whole sense of self, your agent, is less in terms of your individuality and more in terms of the larger field which you are. And that larger field, which is underlying all of life. So you begin to feel more connected with everything around you. Your thoughts that come up are not only useful for you, but also for the larger environment. And this has its own brainwave. It's called alpha. It's 8 to 10 cycles per second. It's actually the lower part of alpha. The alpha frequency is from 8 to 12. What we see during transcending is between 8 to 10. And this is created by, it's called thalamocortical loop. So the thalamus is the core of the brain. It's a switchboard. And it's just arousal going to the core of the brain, coming up to the cortex and going back. It's enough to deliver wakefulness, alertness, but there's not a specific experience. So each meditation has different procedures. With that, they have different brain waves, and they have different focuses, different reasons for their practice.
So I can see now it makes much more sense. Intuitively, what came to mind was the alpha state. I was talking with a friend about that kids are creative geniuses alone because they're always in that creative state. And I always try to see and tap more into that place. What's your thoughts on that kids are creative geniuses?
I wouldn't quite, well, first, I would agree with you want to tap into that creative place. That creative place is where the individual wave rises up from the ocean. Mm-hmm. As I was mentioning with your dad, if you tell him where did his creativity come from, it came from silence. Are kids more in touch with that? They could be. The point about kids is their interface is structured completely differently than adults. 3 to 7 year olds actually have twice the number of connections between their brain waves than you or I do. They get twice as much as input. They live in a world of magic. They don't have the ability to have logical, critical, sequential thought. Everything is an idea and it pops up and they play with it. Another idea pops up and play with it. It's a great age as a parent. You give your child a present, they look at the present, they put it aside, then they play with the box. Oh, the box can be a dragon. It can be a spaceship. And what they're doing is they're exercising their ability to see different things. Then between 7 and 10, what you do is you get connections between the left and right sides of the brain. And what grows then is rule-governed behavior. 10-year-olds are little scientists. Suddenly they realize that there's cause and effect. If I do this, I can affect that. And they love to do experiments. They also love rules. 10-year-old rules are absolute. You can't violate a rule. We had a rule, it gets hot here in Iowa, and we had a rule in Iowa we had a rule in our family that we can only have ice cream if it's 90 degrees or hotter. I just made that up because I have three daughters and it's hot and they come up, Daddy, can we have ice cream? Daddy. So I just came up with that. I remember the look on their faces. It was like now they were in control. They ran to the thermometer, saw what the thermometer was. Then they would come up and say, Dad, it's 91. We want some ice cream. They love those rules. And then what happened, I bring this up because what happens about age 10 is a process of all of the abundant connections they have. You drop off those that you haven't used. It's neural pruning is what it's called. And what emerges then is a sense of individuality. And these are the teenage years.
Mm.
And in the teenage years, the individual before was completely identified with the family. They didn't have the brain structure to see themselves as an individual. Now, as the individuality begins to come forth, they begin to question everything, all rules, including the ice cream rule, and all rules. And it can be very challenging for a parent because they may challenge, oh, I don't need to make money. I don't need to go to college. Drugs are okay. Risky behavior, all of this stuff. They're not actually embodying that, embracing it. They're playing with it. They're looking at it. And so while this is going through, the whole creativity process will be different. The 3 to 10-year-old is just creativity all the time. They don't have the restrictions of a logical thinking to put on what their ideas are. And so anything goes. And they realize it. If they come up and they say, oh, I have an invisible friend. Can we set a table for them? And you can say, oh, yes, we'll set a table. You can ask them, do you really have an invisible friend? They'll say, no, there's nobody there. But yes, I have an invisible friend. It's just a delightful time to play with them. So, when they talk about the creativity of a youth, of children, I think this is the age they're talking of.
First of all, it's so interesting to see how it evolves with the consciousness and how you become an individual through that process. The point that you said about being identified solely with the family and not having your own individual self is so mind-boggling. Because I look back and I'm like, yes, I can remember feeling that. And I can see it in my little cousins too. I want to ask you, there's a fascinating question, perhaps the most fascinating one till now. You've mentioned long-term TM practices leads to higher psychological development, ego development. Could you explain what you mean by this?
Excellent. Yes, because someone may hear ego development and think the person is getting a big ego.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought.
Ego development means what is the range of that you see that yourself encompasses. So someone with a big ego is actually, for ego development, very low level of ego development. They only see what's important is what they see as important. They don't respect what others think, what others need. They're just completely focused. It's my way or the highway. If you don't think the same as me, you're wrong, and so on. Higher levels of ego development, you begin to realize that you're in a larger society. So first you become individualistic, that you can have an idea. This idea can be different from another person, and it's okay. You don't have to try to force the other person to think the same way as you. It's called self-aware. And then as you begin to grow a little bit more, you realize that who you are is something which is fundamentally the same as who everyone else is. Again, the wave and ocean. We're individual waves. Yes, it's different, but we're all made of water. And this is not a cognitive intellectual idea you have in your mind. It's actually your perception that everyone is trying the best. Someone might be a real jerk. They're really making bad decisions. But you realize that they're doing the best that they can. This is how they see is the best situation. This idea of paradoxical understanding. And this is what we mean by ego development becoming larger. To ultimately, you realize that you're fundamentally connected with everything around you. That fundamental field of life, which is giving rise to trees and the grass and the flowers and the sky and the oceans, giving rise to the animals and the birds and how they interact, is also underlying you, and you begin to identify with that reality. And so when we mean larger values, higher levels of ego development, we're meaning seeing yourself as being more inclusive, more supportive of those around you.
That clears up a lot of things. Because when I read ego development, I was like, Am I doing it wrong? does the Buddha, was the Buddha lying to me? I want to dive deeper into the Vedic science because you're a professor at the Maharaji University and you're deep into Vedic science. I want to ask you a question. Do you recall your first or favorite breakthrough state in deep meditation?
I think the first one was when I learned Transcendental Meditation. And just imagine that you're constantly moving all the time and sort of into that motion and focus, and suddenly you stop moving. And this is happening not physiologically, but that's an analog for the mind. The mind is just always turning and thinking and evaluating. Suddenly the mind is just quiet. But it's not an inert type of quiet, it's sleep. It's more like, again, the waves settling down to the ocean. Suddenly you realize you are that ocean. And all of the waves and things are going, and the sensory experience is very much on the outside. So that was my first experience when I learned TM. And this is the mind settling down. We call it to pure consciousness. We use the word pure to mean that consciousness which has no thought, no activity, but it's awareness itself. And then that experience is just, continued through meditation, and that experience begins to permeate daily activity.
How did it feel like?
It feels like coming back home. It's as though, oh yeah, there's no place to go, nothing I have to do, nothing I have to be, completely whole, completely full, completely content. And not content so that you're not urged to do something, but content in that you're happy to be where you are.
Happy to be where you are. That's that's a tough ask for a lot of people, including me. Sometimes I'm gonna be honest. Sometimes I wish I've cultivated that state. I used to suffer a lot. Used to be really insecure. And I got through this self-development journey and I started trying things. Started trying going to the gym, reading, meditating, to try to find a solution. And once I was like, okay, I'm going to find a way to stop and end this suffering. Because my mind was a very annoying roommate. And I mean, very annoying. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to figure it out. I read books. I read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and that gave me a glimpse. Yeah. I felt something. I was like, wow, this is a glimpse of something really powerful. And once during a meditation, to give you context, I was in the UK. It was exam week, the most stressful week of the year. And I wake up one day and I was like, no, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm done. But I still gather up the strength and go up to the library without my phone. And I was really pissed that day, anxious, stress, the voice in the mind was bad. I see a tree just before entering the library. And I was like, okay, let me try to meditate and see if things get better. I go into that meditation and it turns out to be one of the most powerful meditations in my entire life. And I touch that place that you talk about, the pure consciousness. And I feel the purest level of bliss and love and joy. The thing I've been seeking my whole life to end the suffering. It felt like that. You found the solution. Then I opened my eyes and my heart was open. And I saw strangers and I had love for them. And I didn't even know them. I saw I saw the garden and it was all more bright and more felt new. And then I see a bird in front of me, an orange bird. And he jumps in front of me and looks at me like that. And then he jumps on my knee. Like I was like, what's happening? And after that experience, I was like, this is it. This is the solution.
Yes. And notice you found it by going inside. Your journey is, I think, what everyone experiences. They look outside for that experience. And it's okay because when we're born, We don't know where our skin ends and the world begins. We don't actually see stable visual and auditory images. It's like fireworks. And the first thing the brain does, the interface, is allows us to identify with the outside world. But at that point, we're completely identified. We don't have a thinker, a feeler, experiencer. We just have that sensory perception. And what's happening with development is we're transcending. And this was with a small t. And first you find that you can think about the objects outside. And then you find you can think about your thoughts. And so our whole education, our whole brain development has been looking outside. And so it's very understandable. The journey you had, I think the journey which every seeker has, looking outside. I have to read this. I have to talk to this. I have to do this. And when they realize no, they have to turn their attention within. And that's why meditation practices, I think, are so important for education, so important for development. Because all of education is turning your attention out. You want to just turn the attention within. And suddenly it's there. It's always been there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the nervous system hasn't been able to experience it. But it's such a very rich, real experience that you had. It wasn't hallucination. It wasn't any of those negative things we talk about. And you know that. It was a very solid, real experience. Your physiology was functioning at that way to support that experience. It's great.
Honestly, it felt more real than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah. It is, because everything else is changing. Everything else is in time and space. That value of pure consciousness is outside of time and space. Every time you sit and meditate, it's there. You experience it. And this is a transition that happens as you meditate. First, pure consciousness is somehow very abstract. It's really hard to explain. The outside world is a concrete world that I live in. As you meditate, you realize the concrete world is always changing. It's phenomenal. It's here now, but it's gone tomorrow. But that inner pure consciousness is always there and becomes the most concrete part of your experience.
And then what happens when you have that peak state? How does that change your nervous system and brain coherence?
What happens is, just to see anatomically, we're seeing that the core of the brain is just humming to itself. And that's supporting that experience of pure consciousness you had, of wholeness, of wakefulness. Then, when activity happens, it's a localized, as if island of activity on top of that wholeness. So what happens is, just as you experience, you look up, you see people, and you can describe them and so on. But your perception, that experience, is fundamentally different because you have changed. You're now whole. And you begin to see them more in terms of they're part of the larger system. They're part of this harmony, and you appreciate it. And so what happens is your appreciation of the world grows. And the appreciation is the deep understanding that everything is interconnected. And you see how the trees and the grass and the people and the buildings and the squirrels and the birds, they're all part of a larger wholeness. And that's how you're perceiving life. And it's really awe-inspiring. It's just so beautiful, the intricate harmony within which we live. And you appreciate that now you're part of that. You're moving within it. And ultimately experience that you are that harmony that now you see outside, that people are connected together, that's the same fundamental value that's underlying ye, that they're one. And that's the highest value of human development. It's called unity consciousness, Brahmi Chaitana, where everything is seen as a whole and all of variety and diversity is just seen as a wave within that wholeness.
The first thing that I felt in that moment was one with everything. One with everything. Yeah. And the feeling of awe you described, that was it. I couldn't, Dr. Travis, I couldn't control my smile. And that was not usual, because I used to, when I was 16, I went through bullying and trauma, and I developed this self-image that I'm really unattractive and ugly. And then I used to put on this, angry face, like this resting. Can I insult, or can I say a bad word, or let's keep, okay.
It's okay.
The B word, a resting B face.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I couldn't control my laughter. I couldn't control my smile, and I was in awe. I was like, this is the most beautiful. There's nothing that comes close to this. Nothing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Exactly. And to feel that flow of that field of wholeness through you, that's what you're experiencing, and that's why you were smiling. There's a saying in the Vedic tradition that bliss becomes blissful through practice. That as you experience that inner field of pure consciousness and it's full and whole, that blissful feeling comes when it begins to move out. Because what is moving out is wholeness, is integration, is harmony. And we experience that just as you experience love for all things and just deep appreciation. You have the time and the ability to really embrace a little red bird on your knee. And all of the aspects. It had some characteristics to it. It was this size, it was this color, but also it was a living thing. And also that living thing was relating with you. And that's what your whole experience was.
That's beautiful. I want to ask you, as an ending final question, perhaps that could lead to a few more questions. What book has recently brought you a lot of peace?
It's an interesting question. I think Dr. Nader's recent book, One Unbounded Ocean of Consciousness, and it's brought me peace in terms of its comprehensive nature. It pays tribute to how modern science, neuroscience, modern philosophers have tried to understand consciousness. And it pays tribute to the meditation experiences where consciousness is full and whole and unbounded. It's not tied to an individual nervous system. And it goes back and forth and says, okay, what's their relationship? It talks about the current understanding, materialistic model that it's the brain produces consciousness, but neuroscience hasn't made any progress in the last 30 years. They know how light hits the eye, leads to computation in the back of the brain, occipital cortex, then waves over the back part of the brain for space, front part of the brain for details. They can tell you in excruciating detail that, but they don't know where it becomes a conscious experience. It's called an explanatory gap. And what Dr. Nader suggests, he says, well, this is just a model. And in science, the model's not sacred. Well, let's turn it on its head. What happens if consciousness is primary, rather than matter is primary? And then we have to explain how physical reality is simply a pattern of consciousness. And that's actually much easier. And just following his thought, his logic of how we start with everything is wholeness, everything is consciousness. And this is not human consciousness, but this idea of pure consciousness. It permeates the entire world. It permeates ourselves. It permeates the whole universe. And what it's doing is by interacting with itself, it creates patterns within itself. And this is what are called the Veda. The Veda are the patterns within this field of pure consciousness. And these patterns interact and become patterns of matter. And so therefore we have physiology. And he's gone through and detailed how are the different branches of the Vedic literature, the different books of the Vedic literature expressed in the different aspects of the physiology, really looking at this connection in a very systematic way. So this book brought just all of the questions and the eddies of what might be and so on. He brought it all together into a wholeness. So I really enjoyed that book.
That's so interesting because I had a conversation with Dr. Nader a few days ago. And
oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it was so interesting and so beautiful to hear. I do have a question for you, and I think it's a beautiful one that every spiritual seeker loves to answer. It's what's your favorite spiritual quote?
Man is born to enjoy. Man is not born to suffer. That's what drives the experience of the transcendent. That's what drives people coming together and sharing. The nature of life is to grow. I think that's my favorite spiritual saying, even though it's a non-spiritual words being used, but it's talking about wholeness. It's talking about that wholeness is a fundamental part of life around us. And life is here to actually become one with wholeness, to realize wholeness, to realize how we're connected with everyone around us. So I think that's my favorite.
I'm going to actually think of mine. It's so interesting.
Okay,
Man is born to enjoy. it's such a it seems so simple at first, but it's so deep, because once you touch that place, you realize I'm already whole. I don't need to prove anything to anyone. I don't need to achieve
Good.
to seem worthy. I don't need to.
Yeah.
I'm already whole. Just enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think my favorite quote, I think it's by Eckhart Tolle. He says, "Life is not as serious as the mind makes it to be."
I love it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our individual intellect is good at complexifying. It's divides,
Mhm.
and it can divide and divide and divide and divide. It definitely makes complexity. But the nature of life is wholeness, is simplicity. And that's why, as I think you get deeper and deeper to that field, the statements about it become more and more simple and whole.
Mm.
But I like that statement by Eckhart. Thank you.
It was actually my friend's WhatsApp status for a long time. My best friends. So,
Wow.
yeah. That's so amazing. I want to thank you, Dr. Fred, for your time. And I want to leave you the I will not only leave you, I am excited to give you the space to promote anything you would like, that you're excited about.
Just this whole idea that consciousness is all there is. To have people open up their intellect, open up their hearts, and embrace, what that idea might mean. Because we're on the middle, a cusp of a huge transformation in paradigm. From mechanistic materialism to holistic in consciousness. And this is being seen in philosophy. It's being seen in neuroscience. Models of consciousness are becoming more and more expanded. And so I just hope that people will take the next step. It's easy to continue what they've done. It's harder to go into a new arena, but to open up their hearts and their minds to this reality.
That's beautiful. The train is calling us to go.
Yes.
It's calling us to go on this spiritual journey. If that's not a sign, I don't know what is. I feel like I'm back in the 1970s.
Really. This has been a delightful talk. Thank you for contacting me, and all the best with everything you do.
Thank you so much. So much. We'll stay in touch by mail. And
yes,
other than
please.
that, it's been a pleasure. Even the word pleasure doesn't do it right. Doesn't do it. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Thank you so much. Ciao.
Okay.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Bro, I just finished the conversation. This was probably one of the best conversations I've ever had till now. It's so fascinating the way your brain coherence improves the more you meditate, transcendental meditation specifically, and the different categories of meditation. It's so interesting that some meditations have a certain specific focus, right? And as you go deeper and deeper, you can reach higher states of consciousness like alpha and delta, which put you in those creative states of genius, right? And how meditation is not only a thing where you just sit down and do nothing, but no, it actually contributes and helps your performance. So it's so beautiful. It's such a huge pleasure to have had this conversation with Dr. Fred. And I want to tell you, look, I'm trying to make more in-person interviews. They're the coolest thing to do. I love live, also like online conversations, but in person, face to face, it's a different type of energy. And so if you want to contribute and help us fund these interviews, I'm going to put the Patreon below. You can help in a small or big way. I think the small way is like $5. The big way is $20. And this will help us fund traveling, editors, and going and setting up the face-to-face conversations with guests all around the world. I really want to travel to the UK, and I have a lot of huge guests actually there that I want to interview face-to-face, like Hamza Ahmed, like David Icke, Dr. Julie. There's so many huge people, and in the US too, there's a lot of them that I want to interview, and in Europe. So if you want to support the podcast, I'm genuinely, I've actually journaled about this. I want to serve. I said, thank you, Lord, for serving the #1 spiritual development podcast in the world. This is my goal. I want to serve this, right? I want to help people raise their consciousness and to be on that same journey together. I think it's so beautiful because when you're surrounded with people that are spiritual seekers, right, and they want to take their lives to the next level, it's so beautiful to have people around. That's how I started. My best friend and I started. We were really suffering, and we read this book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now, which, if you haven't read, please read it. And we started going on this spiritual journey. So I really want to share this experience with you guys and eventually have live conversations. When I say live, I mean face to face, and you can be in the audience and get to talk to you, get to interact with the audience. And I'm actually thinking of live streaming the episodes on Twitch or on Twitch. And I think it could be so cool. If you want to support us, the Patreon is the first link below. Please, if you resonate with the mission, and if you want to help in a small or big way and help make this mission a reality, go to the Patreon and help any way you can. I want to fund more in-person conversations face to face. It's a different type of energy. It's a different type of relationship. It's a different type of value you'll get because you connect with the person on a more physical level. And it's so beautiful. Like, I still talk with all the guests. I think 99% of them that I've had in-person conversations with, they're literally some of my best friends now. And so, yeah, this is pretty much it. I'm so grateful that you took the time to invest in yourself and in taking yourself to higher states of consciousness and to deepening your connection with your true self, your being. Because this is the ultimate goal of why we're here, right? This is the ultimate purpose. So guys, thank you for making the time. It's been your boy, Aji, and take care.